In this lesson, we'll take our completed walkie-talkie model and we'll set up the layers so that we can bring it in KeyShot and be able to play around with the materials and really get a nice professional looking rendering. If you'd like to work with the file you've been working on, that's great. If you'd like to work with exactly the same file that I'm starting with, if you go into your sample files, Chapter 9, and choose 09 Walkie-talkie Render Start. So once the file opens, you'll notice as we've been going along, we've been doing a pretty good job of housekeeping to keep things neat and tidy. We've got a whole folder here of not used layers and not used curves and things like that. That's working out really nice, and that's really to our advantage. If we didn't have these all set up, these are the kind of things we need to set up before we bring the model into KeyShot. And the reason for that is it's really nice and easy to work in KeyShot if you use layers in Rhino. And why you use layers in Rhino is anything that's on a layer can have a different color applied to it than something that's on another layer. So we have my walkie-talkie model here, and by the time we're finished, we're going to have a sort of a collection of different materials and things like that. And if these weren't all on separate layers, we'd have to click on each little part to apply a different material every time we wanted to make a change. So by having these all on their own layers, they essentially display in KeyShot, and they're treated the same way in KeyShot as they are treated in Rhino. So they're all individual parts. If I go in here and Bez 1, I change this color to, let's say, a blue. Now make it a green. And hit OK. Now you can see that's changed. It'll be the same thing in KeyShot. Just sort of move that out of the way so you can notice the change. So I'll make that an orange, hit OK. It'll work the same in KeyShot, except we'll be adding very realistic looking materials. So everything is set up the way I want it in here. The only difference, and I'll go ahead and switch all the layers off with the exception of the main body, is I do want to be able to do a couple of things here. The main body, I'm for the most part going to keep the way it is, at least visually, color-wise. But I may at some points want to get a little space here. Maybe I want a little bit more of a gap that I may get out of KeyShot when I use the edge softening. So I'm going to end up putting these three pieces onto their own layers. And that'll allow me in KeyShot to move them individually. You can move parts around in KeyShot. You're not stuck with just rendering things where they come in. So main body, I'm actually going to change that to main body front. I'll hit enter. I'll press the new layer icon again. Call this main body back. And I do want the battery door in a separate layer. Instead of hitting enter, then pressing this icon, I can just tap the tab key and that creates a new layer for me. And I'll just call that battery door and hit enter. So I'm going to move these parts off to their own layers. I'll select the battery door, change object layer, and then the main body back and change object layer. I don't like that these parts are the same colors, so as always, I just go in here and just give them a slightly different color. And that way I get a very quick visual on different layers, and then I can treat them differently if I need to. So that's all well and good. The other thing that I'm going to do is actually, I may want to put a different texture on these little side cuts. So I am going to put those all on their own separate layer. So I'm going to extract those surfaces. So I'll right click on the explode icon. And then I'm going to have to zoom in here to really see what I'm doing. So I want that piece, that piece, that piece, and that piece. And I do these for all of the remaining side cuts. Can get a little tedious. I have not found a faster way to do this. So that's all of those parts. And then we'll just zoom in on this side, do the same thing. And if I try and click right in the center of a part and not on an edge, then it generally knows what I'm trying to select. So that all looks pretty good. I'll just hit enter. And while I still have them selected, I'm going to middle mouse click and then press join. You can see that's pulled them all onto the same layer because they're all now joined into one part. But I'm going to make its own separate layer. That way I can throw a totally different texture on here. And I'll just call that side cuts. And we'll change the object layer color. And these I want to kind of pop a little bit just so I remember that I do have them different. So these I'll make kind of a hot pinkish color. Now those will really stand out from everything else I've got going on. Bring the rest of my model back. So I get a really good illustration of how I have my layers all set up. Let's not forget I do have two options for the face grill. So we have our rounded option, and then we have our squircled option. And remember on that we did some edge softening. Let me go to rendered mode here. We did some edge softening in Rhino rather than putting all those fillets into that particular layer. Switch back to shaded mode. So that completes this lesson on setting up our layers for rendering in KeyShot.